Taxi opens its third season with a weird question. What if one of the funniest characters on the show wasn't funny at all? And somehow, it still works.
It's terrible. My life is over.
Oh. Well, see you tomorrow.
Taxi is doing something risky here. This isn't a reset episode, it's not light, it's not even especially joke-dense for long stretches. This is an episode that lives or dies entirely on Louie De Palma, whether you find him unbearable, tragic, or weirdly relatable. And with that in mind, welcome back to The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be ranking the first episode of the third season of Taxi titled Louie's Rival, written by Ken Eston and directed by Jimmy Burrows. So let's see how this one stacks up, starting with the episode overview. On to the third season of Taxi, and we're going to open the third season with Elaine excitedly telling everyone in the garage that Doug Johnson from the art gallery has finally asked her out. So now she's in need of babysitting services. And as soon as she says that, all the guys in the garage turn around and walk away from her. But I don't really understand this because we had a whole episode in season 2 about how great her kid is and how much they love being around him. And they all say that they want to babysit him again. So what happened between then and now? Also, does she really not know anybody outside of the garage that can babysit her kids? But this story, even though it started the episode, is the B story. Even more odd is that nothing really comes out of this. This isn't really a story as much as it is a talking point to give the other characters, because the real story is coming up when Louie is trying to get Alex to get into his cage with him. Of course, Alex just ignores him, and then eventually Louie's like, all right, stay right there, I'm coming to you. Nice bit of taking control by Alex, which I enjoyed, actually. But the plot of the story begins with Louie telling Alex that he's worried about losing Zena. I mean, it takes a while for him to get there, but he does eventually say that. And in a funny way. You see, Zena sees something in him that no woman has ever seen. Well, that no other person has ever seen. That isn't there. Alex, as he is wont to do, tries to help Louie out. He asks Louie, what's a typical good night for you and Zena? Louie says, watch some TV and hit the sheets. So, you know, he's not a romantic. But then we get a bit where Alex is describing a romantic date, and Louie is taking notes because he just can't fathom it. He gets hung up on the talk part of dating. Now, I agree that this is a cute bit, but we just had an episode where he writes a script for him and Elaine to do while they're on a date. And he puts together a pretty nice date. So how does he not know how to do this? And this is the problem with modern viewing and viewing in the 70s and 80s. Well, anytime before streaming, really. There didn't need to be as much series continuity back then. If you missed an episode, you missed it. And people weren't binging to keep the story straight. Then the episode is going to shift away from the garage and go to Zena's apartment, where Louie comes in complaining about everything they did on that date. He really didn't keep the notes. Eventually, Zena is exasperated enough to just ask him to leave. And he just sort of doesn't. He ends up chasing her around her apartment trying to grab her ass until she gets him in a headlock. And the fact that she gets mad at him for it, he's like, what am I doing that's so bad? I think you're beautiful. You arouse me. Officer, take me away. But the other shoe was going to drop eventually. So I sort of wonder if Louie had just consented to her wishes for him to leave, if he would have just remained in the dark about the whole thing. But he doesn't, so she tells him that she met someone else, a bartender named Dwight from Mario's. And Mario's is like the cabbie bar, so, you know, I bet it's somebody Louie knows. She eventually says that they became lovers, and then we get this bit where Louie just stops breathing. I mean, he turns red. It was a fun visual. But now Louie's really sad, and he leaves the apartment saying that one day, Zena's gonna come begging for him to take her back. And you know what he's gonna say? Thank God. It's kind of a nice moment for Louie. At this point of the episode, though, it has only made me laugh 3 times. And I was really starting to wonder if the Taxi writers knew that they were writing a sitcom. I mean, this is all pretty heavy so far. But we're gonna cut from the heavy stuff to the gang at Mario's now. So earlier, Bobby was the one that got roped into babysitting because he couldn't remember the name of his date. As in, clearly it wasn't that important. But he's gonna try to get out of it now by saying, my date's name is Gloria. And then she's like, what's her last name? And then he's like, fuck it. All right, what time am I supposed to show up? At least it's some levity after the, breakup here. But Jim is the one that's gonna sort of save us and give us the comedy that we need in this moment. Jim is gonna ask Elaine, do you want to dance? And Elaine's gonna say, well, there's no music playing. Jim's gonna say, well, I just put a quarter in the jukebox, so something's gonna be playing soon. And then we get a waiter or, somebody that works at the restaurant says, no, you just put a quarter in the cigarette machine. So Jim then asks Elaine, do you want to smoke? And then she says, no, but it's the way Jim does it. It's funny. But they're all going to leave shortly after that. As they're leaving, Jim's like, wait a second, they haven't even played my cigarette yet. But Louie's going to enter the restaurant as they're all leaving, and he looks terrible, which Bobby points out. And Louie's basically like, I'm shattered, my world is over. And then Bobby's like, oh, I'll see you tomorrow. Of course, Alex is going to hang back to talk to Louie, though, because he's Alex, and he's going to hear the whole story. That Zena broke up with Louie, that Louie can't sleep. They even kept his mom up all night. And when Alex is like, well, why'd you do that? And he's like, well, what the hell else am I going to do? Who am I going to talk to? The wall? So then Alex is going to start to try to align with him, right? He's going to be like, hey, I can relate to this because I had a relationship that I lost or, got broken up with or whatever. But Louie cuts him off and is like, hey, this is about me. Stop being so selfish. Let's keep this selfishness in check, Rieger. Also, Louie is convinced that the guy behind the bar right now is Dwight, the man that took Zena away from him. Alex is going to say it's probably not Dwight. And then Louie's going to be like, well, there's only one way to make sure. Hey, Dwight, look out. And this poor guy, who's obviously Dwight, ends up dropping all the dishes he's carrying. And then Alex is like, look, I'm going to go get us some beers. You just need to stay here and relax. But Louie's going to see the opportunity for more information, right? And he's going to tell Alex, yeah, go over there and get us a beer and pump the scum. Which, until I said it aloud just now, I didn't even realize how sexual that sounded, which makes it so much worse and yet still funny in my head. Meanwhile, Alex is treating Louie like a dog, telling him to sit over and over again, right? And then finally, when Louie does actually sit, then as Alex is leaving, he keeps telling him to stay. He keeps turning around, stay. And this is such stupid shit, but it really was funny in the moment. Then Alex, when he goes to the bar to get the beer, he's actually trying not to get any of the information out of the guy. All he says is, how you doing? And then Dwight here is just like, I'm Dwight. I just started dating this girl named Zena, and it was really fun because she was dating somebody else and, there wasn't anything serious, but now she wants something serious and I don't. So, I'm going to break it off with her. He ends up kind of sounding like a dick, actually. But now Alex has something to actually tell Louie, and he does. And for a moment, we think Louie's heart might have grown like the Grinch. He says he's torn because he doesn't want this guy to break Zena's heart, but he knows it's better for him. But what's he torn between? Joy and rapture. So, same old Louie. So the next thing we get is Dwight breaking up with Zena in Zena's apartment. And shortly after he's apologizing for breaking up with her, Louie shows up and just shoves him out the door and be like, yeah. And then Louie just walks up to Zena's fridge and starts going through it and getting bread and sandwich fixings, and he's making himself a sandwich, which looked disgusting, by the way. He's just assuming now that Dwight's out of the picture, he's back in. He says to her that he wanted to make her beg, but now feels like he can't. Well, maybe he'll make her beg a little. And then she says, Louie, I don't want you back. To which Louie replies, you're gonna have to do better than that. She's gonna say that Dwight wasn't the only reason she stopped seeing Louie. Most of it was Louie himself, which, that makes sense, Zena. He's got a personality problem, a sex problem, a this problem, a that problem. Basically, any problem a person could have, Louie has it. But Louie's most concerned about the sex problem, but is relieved to find out that the problem is that he doesn't stop thinking about it. And after this, though, the episode is going to turn surprisingly, sweet. Louie's going to say, Zena, don't you love me? And she's like, I don't know what love is. And eventually he cajoles her into asking him what love is, and he says, it's the end of happiness, which sounds like a Louie line, and also not one that you'd want to say to the woman that you're trying to win back over. But he says that one day you're happy watching the Mets on TV. Then the next day you're watching the Mets, and you gotta have Zena there. You don't know why, but you have to have Zena there when you watch the Mets. And this is actually a really touching metaphor. I was surprised by it, as was Zena, but it turns her around on him in the moment. He says, you want to see me again, Zena? And they're about to kiss when she stops herself and says, oh God. Basically, she's lamenting that she's falling into the same trap. She wanted to get out of this bad relationship, and now here she is again. The same bad relationship she was in to begin with. She'll never get out from under it. Then Louie ends the episode after she says this by saying, oh, Zena, you don't know how happy that makes me to hear you say that. And that's the whole episode. Let's find out how it ranked.
Rank.
So the rank is where I rank the episode based on 5 categories: story, acting, dialogue, episode coherence, and character relatability. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And then I have a laugh counter where I tally up the amount of times the episode made me laugh. 1 point per laugh out loud gets added to the score. But before I dive into the rankings here, I just want to say if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help me out. But without further ado, the first category is story. So it's a story about Louie's fear of losing a relationship. I mean, it's a little heavy to open a season with, but it's a solid story. It has a very clear arc and it doesn't take too much to get into it. I gave it a 4.5. And that brings us to acting. Well, anytime we focus on Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman, it's going to be good acting. And this one's no different. We get a little more of Judd Hirsch than anybody else besides these two, but that makes sense. Even the guy who played Dwight did a great job in my opinion. He's supposed to look innocent enough when you first see him, but then be kind of surprisingly sleazy. I feel like that's kind of tough to pull off, and he did. It was a well-acted episode. I gave it a 4.75. So that brings us to dialogue. Throughout the first probably 15 minutes or so, I was like, what are we doing here? Do they know they're writing a comedy? But by the end, I went away from it thinking it was decently funny. Now, a lot of that is thanks to the abilities of Rhea Perlman and Danny DeVito, but I'll give the writing some credit for it too. That being said, they really went too deep into the depressing for too long in the first 2/3 of the episode. I gave it a 3.5 for pulling it out at the end. All right, so that brings us to episode coherence. It's kind of nice that they showed Zena not wanting to deal with Louie's bullshit, but also they hadn't really established that she didn't like his bullshit. And I think anybody watching could understand why she wouldn't want to be with him. It was always a problem of how could she want to be with him, which is why it doesn't really cohere to what we've already seen. Also, Louie doesn't know how to do a date, but puts together this great date for Elaine. And then we have this weird B story that wasn't a story about Elaine dating a guy and nobody wants to babysit her kid, but they had an episode all about how much they like her kid and how much they enjoyed watching him. And this is where coherence is tough on an older show, because in the streaming age, I can keep up with everything. But back then, people may not have noticed. But I live now. That being said, it wasn't like the episode itself was incoherent, so I gave it a 3.25. And that brings us to character relatability. I can relate to Louie and Zena in this episode for sure. I guess Louie is more forgiving than you'd expect from someone who just got cheated on, but I feel like it fits him a little bit. It was a decently relatable episode, so I gave it a 3.5. So some fairly decent rankings here. It wouldn't take that much to keep it in the top 3 tiers. I'm curious if we can get a laugh counter high enough that puts it into the top 2. And it got me 15 times, which gave it a grand total of 34.5, which lands it in. I'd watch it again. But as for the series average, it's at a 26.25, which keeps the series as mediocre. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your score in the comments. I'd be really curious to see where we're aligned. Thanks for listening and or watching. Check out my other Taxi episodes on this channel or any of my other movie or sitcom ranking episodes. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. For up-to-date rankings, check out my website at therankedpodcast.com, where you can also email me at john@therankedpodcast.com. And if you really want to support the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/therankedpodcast. But I will leave you with this. So Louie says love is the end of happiness? Yep, that pretty well sums up a Mets fan.
Whoa, whoa.
It's kind of nice that they showed Zena not wanting to deal with Louie's bullshit, but also, it's kind of nice that they showed Zena not wanting to deal with Louie's oh man.
That's okay. Take your time.